Hello. Welcome to day 3. I'm gonna just wait a few seconds in case anyone still wants to join live. How are you guys feeling today? It's good to have a starting point and then know if things have shifted afterwards. Let us know if you're joining live, say hi. Facebook doesn't always tell me if people are watching, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So if you are watching, just give a wave or leave a comment. It's always nice to know. And also just with the commenting, I've mentioned this in the previous days, but maybe this is the first one that you are joining us for. But yeah, just comment in the comment box, obviously, comment section, with anything that, sometimes I'll have a prompt that I ask or a question that I ask, but you can also put, questions in there, answers to those prompts, anything that you're kind of resonating with or things that you're not resonating with, that you're not sure about. You can put those all in the comments, and at the end of the week I will kind of draw from all the people who have been commenting, and you can win a 90-minute stress audit session. And you can go back to the other days. I spoke a little bit more about what that is. But yeah, that will be a session with me, 90-minute session. And you can win that by engaging in the discussion. Let's all kind of do this together this week. It really helps to have that engagement. Okay, awesome. So just a quick recap of yesterday. So yesterday we spoke more about what I call kind of bottom-up approaches to stress management, emotional management, and looking at kind of what might be the reasons that you are physiologically sort of activated, something that is causing you physiologically to have a kind of stress response in your body. This can be things like sleep, it can be things like nutrition, it can be relationships, it can be all of these things that are causing our body to respond, and then we're kind of making meaning out of that. We are essentially interpreting in our brain what is going on physiologically. And I use the example of when you have a cup of coffee or you have some caffeine, you have a physiological response to that. Heart rate quickening, breathing quickening, maybe sweaty palms, and then you'll notice that you sometimes feel more anxious when you've had caffeine. And part of that is your brain almost interpreting what those physiological signals are doing, what is happening in your body. It starts to go like, okay, why is this happening? And it starts to create like anxious thoughts, looping thoughts, goes into spirals. So that's a kind of bottom-up way that these things can happen. And today we're going to talk more about the top-down. So as with each day, I'll be kind of taking you through a perspective shift that will help with this step. And then we'll do an actual action step at the end, something that you can actually do, something you can implement. And I give sort of more ideas as I'm talking as well. So you can always try one of those rather, but we try, one specific step together. Okay, so the perspective shift that we're making today is thinking about looking through the lens to looking at the lens. So if you think of like glasses that you are looking through, glasses that you're looking through, that is how you perceive the world, right? That is, you sort of see it as, I'm perceiving the world directly through these lenses, right? You're not even necessarily aware that you have a lens, because you just see it as, I'm viewing the world directly. It's a direct reflection of what is happening in the world. I'm sort of getting into my brain or my visual field, right? And now we want to almost like take off those glasses and look at them and look at what kind of lens that is. What color is it? What shape is it, metaphorically speaking, of course. We're trying to take a look at our thoughts, our beliefs, our assumptions, the way that we see the world. We're trying to look at that rather than just looking through it and seeing that as a direct reflection of like the truth of the universe. So just a few examples of the lenses that we look through, right? And this is more maybe not specific because we each have our own beliefs and assumptions that will create this lens, but just from a kind of natural functioning of our brain, right? We can think about our lens is going to have a general negativity bias, right? That's how our brains work. We generally have a negativity bias. If you think of like that example of, you know, someone has given you a review and they say 10 amazing things and they say one not so great thing, and you fixate on that not so great thing, right? It's like also when people say, you know, I can't enforce my cancellation policy because that one time I had this patient who, like, you know, got so angry and wasn't happy with that, right? Meanwhile, they've had so many patients that had no issue with it, you know, so we have a negativity bias. And it's just important to be aware of that. Again, we're just looking at the lens going, oh, that's so interesting. My brain is going to naturally put more weight on the negative things. So what can I do to kind of combat that? There's this idea of the positivity ratio, which is 3:1. So we actually need a ratio of 3 like positive or emotions that feel good or make us feel good about the world, essentially. We need a ratio of 3 of those, or positive things that happen rather, as well, to every 1 negative emotion or negative thing that happens, right? So if you read a negative piece of news, read 3 things about things that are good that have happened, right? So that is how we can combat that negativity bias. If you already know, okay, my brain is going to tend towards negativity, how can I combat that? Things like gratitude journaling also have the same kind of effect, right? Affirmations, things like that. Anything that is, sometimes it's just journaling, right? On, okay, what went well today? If I find an example of something that didn't go so great, how can I find more examples that it did go great, right? So anything that is finding some evidence of the good stuff, knowing that your brain is going to tend towards negativity. Things like black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking, right? We tend to make overall kind of generalizations. Someone is either a good person or a bad person. They're either selfish or they're not selfish, right? My practice is either going to work or it's not going to work. There's no like nuance to that, right? So if we can start to notice, okay, that is how my brain functions almost more naturally if it's just left alone to its own devices, let alone to run around, then we can start to think about, okay, how do I combat that black and white thinking? We can maybe find examples where that wasn't the case, or hypothetical examples where we think, okay, maybe that I can think of an example where that wouldn't be the case, that it's not always black and white. We're finding that gray, we're finding that nuance. I'm just trying to think of an example in practice. One of the things that often comes up with clinicians is like a patient, they'll have a patient that, you know, doesn't do their exercises, right? And then the clinician will make this like complete generalization of like patients never do their exercises, right? And then you can start to look at, oh, is that true? Do they always? Can I find examples of people who have done their exercises, right? So just noticing our natural tendencies and how we can combat that. So yeah, with that you can find examples of when your brain goes to always or never or completely or, you know, none, you know, like all those extreme words. We can often find clues in our language for when we are thinking like that. Our mind also tends to mind read and jump to conclusions, right? We see a patient has cancelled, we immediately make an assumption about what has happened and why they cancelled the appointment, right? We might jump to some sort of judgment of them. Oh, that patient, you know, they just don't take responsibility for their health. They're just never willing to put the work in. They really need care, or they need treatment. but they're not willing to invest or whatever, like we jump to that. Or we jump to something about ourselves, right? That the patient didn't like me, they think I'm useless, they don't want to continue with me, right? But we jump to some or other conclusion, whether that's on their side or our side, right? So just noticing that your brain wants to make meaning out of a situation, and it's going to jump to some sort of explanation. And so we can also, again, know that that is a general tendency, and know that you cannot know what someone else is thinking. You cannot know the reason why someone did something without an explanation. And so thinking about either possible scenarios that it could also be, like if you jump to, the patient obviously doesn't like me or thinks I'm a crap healthcare provider, you can think about like what else might be true, what else might be the reason, right? If I put myself in that person's shoes, by way of speaking, what might be other reasons that they would cancel, right? When you have been in a conversation with someone and you see kind of this expression and you interpret that to mean something, you're trying to like mind read. They think I'm stupid or they think I'm selfish or whatever it is, right? And just knowing that, okay, I cannot read their mind, and facial expressions can have so many different interpretations. And also, again, because of that negativity bias, we naturally interpret facial expressions more towards negative than we do positive. Okay, so just noticing all the kind of like ways that our lenses tend to like distort things, and seeing how can we counteract that. Just one caveat that I want to make here is that I don't want you to take this to mean that everything you ever think is just not true, right? That is not what I'm saying. Sometimes we genuinely have certain emotions, certain thoughts, and they're coming more from kind of a subconscious knowing that something isn't right, or that we should go into a particular direction, right? We don't always make decisions and go in certain directions because of very objective thoughts, and that is totally fine. Sometimes, I mean, people will call this all sorts of things, right? Your intuition, your deeper knowing, and there are actual sort of scientific reasons why you might get a sort of feeling or a gut, they call it, your like gut feeling. There are reasons why you might get that, and so I just want to make that caveat that this is not me saying, nothing you think or believe is ever true. It's just that often it's distorted in some way, and we can look at why that might be and how to sort of counteract that. Okay, cool. So often what we're doing with this is just creating some mental distance. So again, that analogy of we're just taking that lens, and instead of looking through it, we're just taking it off and looking at it. So there's just a little bit of distance between us and the picture or the lens that we're looking through, right? So we're creating that space. And there's that famous quote by psychologist and I think neurologist or neuroscientist, neurologist, I think, Viktor Frankl. And he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom, right? So we are creating some sort of space, and we're asking, maybe that is, our intuition or our deeper knowing, and we're taking some distance and actually noticing what our body or our brain is trying to tell us, and maybe we are looking at that for the first time and actually being honest about what it is trying to tell us, right? Sometimes we're creating that mental distance to just look at, okay, where might I be distorting things here, or jumping to conclusions, or going towards the negative, and how can I create a bit of space and not immediately jump into my response based on the information that's coming in, but I can actually look at that from a little bit more kind of objectivity, a little bit more distance. So this is also important. Oh, sorry, before I get there, what I wanted to mention is, just let me know if you're joining live, say hi. Facebook doesn't always tell me, so definitely comment. And sometimes I go a little bit fast because there's so much I want to pack into this. But please feel free to let me know if you have any questions, or just responding to anything as I go. Okay, so it's easier for us to understand this, or to like see this, when it's someone else's model of us, like mental model of us, right? Like if someone interacted with you and then they have this thought of, she's so selfish, right, of you, she thinks that, you can sort of see how that's probably just the way that she's interpreting your interaction, and she doesn't know what your actual intentions are. She doesn't know what was actually going on for you. That is based on her idea of what selfish even means, right? What you should be doing, which might be completely different to your model. So we can often see it more clearly when we think of someone else getting us wrong, kind of thing, more than we can see it for ourselves. So that's just an example to help you sort of see it as the same thing happening with you. So our beliefs really do build our worlds. And just like we looked at with the stress mindset, right? The way we actually think about stress itself, whether it's an asset, it's something that helps us grow and thrive and change, something that might be directing us towards something that we need to know, important information, right? Or whether we see it as, this is bad for me, I should avoid stress, this is uncomfortable, I don't want to feel this, pushing it away. We saw how the way that we think about stress affects how we respond to that stress. And it kind of reinforces itself. It keeps kind of spiraling either down or up, depending on how you look at it. So in the same way, these beliefs that we have and these distortions and all of that, they actually build our world and they reinforce themselves, right? Just a funny story about this. My boyfriend once, it was like a mutual friend, and he was saying that the way that she's been responding to him lately feels like, like something's off, and he was trying to like think about what interactions they had. Anyway, so his mental story was, she's upset with me. And he didn't go kind of like ask her or anything. He just said like, she's upset with me. And then he went into the space of, well, she's upset with me. And then went into sort of like, well, I can't help it if she's upset with me, if she needs to come and talk to me, if she's actually upset with me. And he got into this whole like mental model. And what he started doing was kind of like avoiding interacting with her. When he saw her, he wouldn't like greet her as he normally would, whatever. And like the result of this is my friend going, I think he's upset with me. And then she went on this whole like, and it only came out like way later. And both people were thinking that the other person was upset with them, because they kept on like reinforcing that same thing. So because he believed that, he was doing certain actions, certain behaviors, and that just led to even more. So then she thought he was upset with her, and she started doing the same thing, distancing, and then he was like, see, she must be upset with me. She's not, responding to me in the way that she was. So that's just an idea of that. So as I said, there are a couple of ideas. I mentioned mindfulness meditation in terms of like in the moment stress management, and it is really helpful for that. But as I mentioned yesterday, the physiological side is actually even more helpful for that, for in the moment. I think the real benefit of mindfulness meditation really comes down to this kind of thing, where we really are becoming more aware of just what our brain is doing all the time, and more as kind of like a daily practice, and almost thinking of like your brain and your sort of perceptual field is like this big sky, and just noticing how thoughts are like constantly coming and going, emotions are coming and going, that we just get this that same idea of like a little bit of mental distance. We're just taking a step back and watching this all happen, rather than being like in it, right? Watching the cloud instead of being in the cloud, kind of thing. Okay, so that was the first one. And then using certain language that reinforces this idea, or creates that distance rather. So if you think about something like, let's say you say, I'm terrible at sport, right? And you have this, you change your language to say, I am having the thought that I'm bad at sport, right? That already creates a little bit of, you're looking at that thought rather than being in it, right? Or I have the belief that I'm bad at sport, right? Again, this is another good example, because if I think I'm bad at sport, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to avoid sport where possible. I'm going to be so anxious and so fearful whenever I'm actually doing a sport that my performance is actually going to be negatively affected by that. And so I'm going to reinforce the exact same things. I'm going to say, see, I'm bad at sport. So just noticing that kind of looping. And this is a way, again, to create that distance. So I'm having the thought that I have the belief that, right? Often when we have interactions or things happen, we can use the phrase, I'm making that mean, right? The patient cancels her appointment, and I'm making that mean that she doesn't like me. I'm making that mean that the patient doesn't want to take responsibility for their health, etc. So it's just changing just slightly the way that the language that we use, the words that we use, to reflect that distance. And then we can, from there, kind of take that further and actually look at that thought and that belief closer. So the action step that we're going to do today, some of you might be familiar with what is called the steer map. I did some lives and workshops where I use this, but that's fine if you don't know it. I will also link the live that I talked about that a little bit more, because I'm not going to go into the whole steer map today. I'm just going to talk about the first two lines. So the first two lines are your what we call the S line, which is your situation, and your T line, which is your thought. And all we're doing here is just creating some mental distance. The rest of the steer map you use to kind of examine that a little bit as well, and look at how it's kind of self-reinforcing. But this is just that simple step of creating some distance. So in the S line, I want you to tell me so think of like a stressor that you have in your life, something that frustrates you or stresses you or causes like quite an intense emotional reaction. And in the S line, which is the situation, I want you to write purely the facts. So like if 50 random people had to be viewing that situation, they would all agree on these facts, right? Like patient phoned the practice and canceled their appointment. That is the situation, right? Not patient didn't take responsibility for health, or patient didn't want to come back. Those are all the stories or the sort of mental meaning that we're making of it. I want you to put in the S line purely just the situation that everyone would agree on. My coach used to say, just the facts, ma'am. And then the T line stands for thoughts. And I just want you to write down all the thoughts that you're having about that very neutral situation, right? The situation is emotionally neutral. It doesn't have any emotions that are kind of attached to it. It's just the facts. The T, the thoughts line, is where you just write out everything that you're thinking about that. And that can be, I like to say it as like, those are just the sentences coming up in your brain when you think about that situation. So when you think about the patient canceled their appointment, what are some of the sentences that come into your brain, right? Those can be the ones of like, they're not taking responsibility for their health, or they don't like me, they think I'm a terrible healthcare provider, they're never coming back. Those are all the thoughts. And for now, you're just noticing the relationship between those two and going, oh, that's so interesting that my brain makes this meaning, this T line meaning, out of that S line, that situation. And from there, you can play with it in different ways. You can think about like, how might some other hypothetical person see it differently? What is another thought that I could have here, right? But even if you just go there and just stop at like, I'm just creating that distance and I'm just noticing that there's a difference between what actually happened and what meaning my brain is going to make of it. And sometimes the meaning you make is, reflective of the reality. I'm not saying it always isn't. It's just, again, it's often distorted. It's often very negative. It's often very all or nothing. There's often a lot of mind reading. So we are just trying to find something more neutral, and we're trying to just observe that with kind of a curiosity, like, oh, that's so interesting, right? So try that out. You're welcome to put it in the comments as well, your S and your T line, and I can always give you feedback on that as well. Because sometimes we think we're putting a very neutral situation, but it's actually already got a kind of story in there. And I can always guide you on taking that further as well. Okay, awesome. Hope you guys have a good Wednesday, and I will see you again tomorrow.